When Donald Trump walked into the FBI's imposing headquarters unannounced, not a single agent was ready for the chaos he would set in motion. He arrived on a gray morning that seemed to mirror the mood inside the J. Edgar Hoover building. There was an edge in the air, something unspoken, something none of the staff could quite put a finger on. The FBI was no stranger to high-profile visits, but they were always planned, meticulously coordinated, with every second accounted for. Today, though, Trump's sudden appearance sent a jolt of electricity through corridors that prided themselves on routine and discipline. Agents stationed at the front entrance exchanged confused looks as they watched him walk in without warning. No official greeting party, no press conference scheduled. His small entourage, just a driver and one stone-faced aide, seemed equally on edge. Whispers started in the security line. Was it some publicity stunt? A private meeting? No one had a clue. What they did know was that this unannounced arrival was about to disrupt everything they thought they knew about how things worked in the FBI's world. The moment he stepped into the lobby, all eyes were on him. His aura commanded attention, a tangible presence that made even senior agents straighten their jackets and adjust their ties. The building's vaulted ceilings, high windows, and polished floors gave the place a hushed grandeur, but Trump's entrance cut through that silence with an almost seismic force. People paused mid-stride. Phones rang out, unanswered. A handful of staff looked at each other, unsure if they should approach or let him pass. It wasn't typical protocol to leave a figure of his stature unattended, but it also wasn't standard procedure to have him just show up without notice. Trump glanced around, arms folded. He seemed unimpressed by the sense of order the FBI prided itself on. Soon enough, one eager junior agent mustered the courage to greet him, but Trump simply acknowledged him with a quick nod and continued walking. He had a path in mind, no hesitation, no small talk. The echo of his footsteps reverberated through the marble floors, leaving everyone else lingering in a state of unspoken question. What exactly is he doing here? A cluster of agents in dark suits rushed to inform their superiors of the unexpected arrival. They moved quickly, weaving through the hallway as if to gather for an emergency briefing. Overhead, rows of fluorescent lights flickered with that faint electric hum, known only to buildings of intense bureaucracy. The tension mounted when word spread that the visit was unscheduled. No call from the White House, no heads up from any liaison. One assistant director nearly spilled his coffee upon learning the news, while another barked into his phone, demanding an immediate explanation from the front desk. But the front desk staff had none. All they could do was confirm that yes, Trump was indeed here. He had no apparent security detail beyond a single aide, and no one had the slightest idea where he intended to go or why. Rumors sprouted like mushrooms in damp soil. Maybe he was here to access confidential files, or perhaps to confront someone in a high-stakes standoff. That sense of mystery grew with every passing second. Within minutes, a small group of senior officials formed near the building's central corridor, right by a plaque honoring fallen FBI agents. There stood a tall, broad-shouldered man named Donovan Wallace, one of the Bureau's longest-serving supervisors. Wallace had a reputation for being calm under pressure and deeply loyal to the institution's code of conduct. But even he looked rattled as he waited, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. Next to him was Rebecca Beck Simmons, a brilliant analyst with a knack for spotting anomalies in the most complex data sets. She wasn't used to facing unpredictability in human form. Numbers and patterns were her comfort zone. Beck tapped her foot impatiently, eyes darting down the hallway every time a new face appeared. Murmurs swept through the group. Should we detain him? Escort him? Alert the director? But no one had the right answer. Here was a former president walking freely through their halls without a single protocol in place. Trump finally appeared at the far end of that corridor, walking with determined steps. His gaze flicked momentarily to the plaque commemorating agents who lost their lives in the line of duty. Whether it moved him or not, no one could tell. Wallace stepped forward, posture stiff. "Mr. President," he began, voice low, "this is highly unusual. May I ask the reason for your visit?" Trump waved off the question, not rudely, but with the air of someone who believed a direct answer was neither necessary nor relevant. Then, without breaking stride, he said, "I'm here to see how things really work around here. I'd appreciate if no one got in my way." He wasn't shouting, but his voice carried. Agents behind Wallace stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances. Wallace felt the weight of their stares, but more than that, he felt the pressure of his duty. Yet he found himself stepping aside, leaving Trump's path unobstructed, which shocked him more than he cared to admit. Trump simply nodded and continued, beckoning his aide to follow. "What do you think he's looking for?" Beck asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Wallace, who had years of experience reading people, could only shrug. "Something tells me we're all about to find out." With that, they fell in step behind Trump, maintaining a subtle distance. The corridor led to a maze of offices, briefing rooms, and specialized divisions. Security cameras followed every step, capturing Trump's strides in real time. Up in the operations room, the feed blinked across multiple monitors. A cluster of analysts stared, uncertain if they should intervene or keep to their stations. A voice crackled over a shared comm line. "Does anyone have a clue what's going on?" No reply, just static that mirrored the collective confusion. Trump's route took a sudden turn toward a restricted access area. A sign read Behavioral Analysis Unit in bold letters. Everyone knew that was the domain of criminal profilers and psychological experts. Civilians, former presidents or not, weren't generally welcomed there without explicit clearance. This was where the FBI dissected the minds of criminals and terrorists, building psychological profiles to predict their next moves. The atmosphere was more clinical than any hospital hallway. Agents inside that unit dealt in carefully curated facts, not spectacle. Yet Trump walked on as if he had every right to be there. Two guards stationed at the door recognized him immediately, but their training kept them from outwardly reacting. One guard raised a hand indicating it was a secured zone. Trump's answer was simple. He showed no sign of stopping. For a tense moment, it seemed like the guard might physically block his path. But after a split second of uncertain eye contact, the guard let him pass, stepping aside with a guarded sense of resignation. Wallace and Beck followed, their hearts pounding. If word got out that they let him waltz in, there'd be questions, likely career-threatening ones. But they felt, perhaps irrationally, that they needed to see where this led. Inside, the Behavioral Analysis Unit was alive with activity. Banks of computers displayed endless data, mugshots, and suspect sketches. A handful of agents hovered over digital boards, piecing together the puzzle of an ongoing investigation. Trump's presence was like a thunderclap. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heads snapped up, and tensions soared. Agent Morales, a seasoned profiler in her early 40s, frowned at the sight. She pulled out her earpiece and stepped forward. "Sir, this is a restricted environment. I need to see your authorization," she said firmly. Trump simply gazed around the room, ignoring the question altogether. Instead, he focused on one wall lined with suspect photos connected by color-coded strings. "You think you know everything about people," he mused, almost to himself. "But do you really?" Morales exchanged a look with her colleagues. Wallace cleared his throat, attempting to salvage the situation. "Agent Morales," he began, "the director's office." But Morales was not easily deterred. She regarded Trump with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Respectfully, sir, you're not supposed to be here." Trump finally turned to her, his tone measured. "Well, I am here, so you might as well show me what's behind all these secrets." The tension in the room was suffocating. Profiles, evidence boards, and digital files remained on display for a man who no longer occupied the Oval Office, but still commanded an aura of authority. Eyes flicked between Morales and Trump as if waiting for a showdown. Wallace risked a step closer. "Let's proceed in a more official manner, Mr. President. We can arrange a briefing." But Trump seemed unimpressed by the suggestion. "I've had enough briefings to last a lifetime," he replied, turning his attention to a stack of case files on a metal desk. One had a black cover stamped with the words "Classified, Level 4. The color drained from Beck's face. That particular file was part of a high-level operation involving sleeper cells in the country. Definitely not the kind of intel a civilian was allowed to peruse. Yet Trump leaned in, flipping it open before anyone could stop him. Morales let out a sharp breath, glancing at Wallace for direction. But Wallace hesitated. Some invisible force kept him from intervening outright. It might have been fear of a political backlash, or maybe just an internal sense that there was more at play here than protocol could explain. As Trump scanned the file, the hush in the room turned eerie. The only sounds were the hum of the overhead lights and the faint tapping of a keyboard in the corner. Within seconds, Morales took a decisive step forward, placing her hand firmly on the file to close it. "I can't allow that," she said, voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Trump raised an eyebrow, pulling back just enough for Morales to shut the folder. He didn't protest. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Without a word, he handed it to Morales. She opened it, her eyes scanning quickly. Whatever was written there made her stiffen. Her gaze shot back to Trump. She swallowed once, then twice, as though trying to find her voice. Finally, she turned to Wallace. "Sir, we need to move this to a private conference room now." Wallace, unused to seeing Morales so visibly shaken, nodded. Beck, curious and alarmed, peered at the slip of paper. All she caught was a cryptic code and a date, 1987. Morales folded it briskly and signaled to a cluster of agents in the corner. They began clearing one of the smaller glass-walled conference rooms. Once inside, the glass doors sealed, shutting out curious onlookers. Trump positioned himself at the head of the conference table as if by instinct. Morales, Wallace, Beck, and a handful of senior agents joined him. The tension was palpable. "Someone want to explain what's going on?" an older agent demanded, though his question was directed more at Morales than at Trump. Morales inhaled deeply. She looked at Trump with something akin to reluctant respect. "The code on that paper," she said, voice tight. "It links to an operation that predates most of us in this room. It's older than my entire career here." Wallace frowned. "And what does 1987 have to do with this?" Morales exchanged a glance with Beck. "During that year, there was a top-secret investigation into financial channels suspected to be funneling money to covert groups overseas. The FBI had a handful of off-the-record informants, untouchable individuals with high-level connections. Their names and roles were sealed in the highest classifications." She paused, looking directly at Trump. "What I need to know is how you, sir, came into possession of that code, because it's not supposed to exist outside these walls." Trump met her gaze with unwavering calm. "Let's just say I had friends in certain places," he remarked dryly. Beck leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "Are you implying you were involved in that investigation?" Trump shrugged as though it was a trivial matter. "Not exactly, but the people I dealt with back then were. They left me with certain mementos." Murmurs broke out among the agents. Wallace ran a hand over his face, anxiety etched into his features. This was no small revelation. If Trump had knowledge of an old, classified FBI operation, it could have massive implications. Morales tapped the table with her pen. "With all due respect, Mr. President, you can't just waltz in here and open up old wounds. We have protocols, procedures." Trump raised a hand to silence her. "Protocol is part of the reason I'm here. Your system is thorough, but sometimes thoroughness buries the truth so deep it never sees daylight. Don't you agree?" The tension spiked as soon as those words left his mouth. A few agents bristled while others exchanged uneasy looks, perhaps recalling times they'd seen investigations get bogged down in endless red tape. Morales folded her arms. She hated admitting that bureaucracy often slowed them down, but she also believed in the necessity of rules to keep sensitive information out of the wrong hands. "So what's your endgame?" she asked. "Why dredge this up now?" Trump's eyes flicked to Beck, then back to Morales. He paused before answering as though deciding how much to reveal. "Because I think some people are trying to bury something important, and if that happens, the consequences might be more severe than any of us can imagine." His voice was steady, but the undertone was grave. It was enough to send a chill through even the most seasoned agents. No one in that room doubted his conviction. He believed what he was saying. Whether he had proof was another question entirely. Outside the conference room, the rest of the FBI staff could only speculate. Rumors spread like wildfire. The ex-president had discovered a secret infiltration of the Bureau. Or maybe he possessed documents that could shut down ongoing investigations. Others whispered about foreign connections, blackmail, or the possibility that Trump had come to broker a deal for immunity on some undisclosed matter. The speculation grew so rampant that a couple of assistant directors tried to quell the chatter, instructing everyone to focus on their tasks. But tasks were abandoned or half-heartedly done because no one could tear their attention away from the biggest distraction the Bureau had seen in years. The entire building seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of anticipation. Inside that glass-walled room, the conversation turned deeper and more guarded. Morales insisted on verifying the code, pulling up a restricted database on a secure terminal. The screen glowed, lines of text scrolling as she searched for the reference linked to the cryptic combination of letters and numbers Trump had provided. The entire group waited in silence, the hum of the air conditioning the only backdrop to their collective pounding hearts. Then she found it. A single archive file, locked behind multiple layers of encryption. She needed special clearance just to open it. Wallace gave a curt nod, punching in his higher-level credentials. The file's summary popped onto the screen, causing Morales' eyes to widen. She silently gestured for Beck to lean closer. Beck read it, eyebrows shooting up. This references rumored infiltration by foreign interests into major financial circles, Beck said, summarizing for the rest of the room. The informant was codenamed Red Falcon. She paused, meeting Trump's gaze. It says here the informant was never identified but provided critical intel. Trump's lips curved into something akin to a smile. A few agents shifted uncomfortably, sensing that they'd just stepped onto a landmine they hadn't even known existed. A wave of disbelief washed through the group. Morales let out a low whistle. If Red Falcon was never identified, how did you— Trump cut in. Let's just say the name came up in places you wouldn't expect, and I have reason to believe that infiltration might not be a thing of the past. Silence fell like a hammer. Beck typed furiously, sifting through any other references to Red Falcon. Most details were redacted, big black bars replacing entire paragraphs of text. Wallace's jaw tightened. This is bigger than I realized. If infiltration is still ongoing, we could be dealing with a threat that's woven into our core financial institutions, not to mention national security. Trump nodded gravely. Exactly. And I have reason to believe certain high-ranking individuals want to keep it that way. Easier to manipulate the system when no one knows they're in control. Morales exhaled slowly, her mind racing with the implications. If Trump's hunch was correct, they could be looking at a network so old and sophisticated that it had evaded detection for decades. Beck's eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and fear. Cracking an operation like this might be career-defining, but it could also be the kind of thing that ended careers, or lives, if handled incorrectly. Wallace glanced at the group. We need to tread carefully. If there's a leak, or if anyone suspects we're reopening this can of worms, it could tip off the wrong people. Trump leaned back in his chair. That's why I came here directly, without fanfare. If you make a public move, it all goes to hell. Agents looked among themselves, adrenaline surging. This was no ordinary situation. They were treading murky waters, balancing the demands of official protocol against the weight of a potential national security bombshell. Outside, a few more senior officials began gathering near the conference room, peering through the glass with confused, concerned expressions. One of them tried to enter, but Morales held up a hand, her face a stern warning. Not now, she mouthed through the glass, reinforcing the seriousness of the discussion inside. Trump continued to study the group, gauging their reactions. Beck finally spoke up. If there's an active infiltration, we'll need to cross-reference everything from old financial records to current policy shifts that might hint at foreign meddling. But we can't do that openly. We'll draw attention. Trump nodded. What do you propose? She thought for a moment. A small need-to-know team operating under the radar. We gather intel, compare it with these old files, see if we can connect the dots. If we find a lead, we move quietly before our target knows we're onto them. Wallace liked the sound of it, but he also knew they'd be walking a razor's edge. Approving such an investigation without formal clearance could lead to internal charges of misconduct. Yet ignoring the potential threat could be worse. Morales rubbed her temples, weighing the risks. We'll have to keep it off the books, at least until we're sure. That means minimal paper trail, no email logs that can be traced. If even a whisper of this gets out, the infiltration, if it exists, will shut us down. Trump glanced at the frosted glass door, as if sensing the eyes of half the FBI on him. That's why I came unannounced. Too many official channels can be exploited. Wallace ran a hand across his mouth. We should also consider the possibility that you're being followed or monitored, Mr. President. If these people are as embedded as we think, they might have eyes on your movements. Trump's features hardened. I can handle myself, but I appreciate the concern. Right now, what matters is whether you believe me enough to take action. Morales tapped her pen on the table. She'd spent her career analyzing criminal minds, dissecting motives. She studied Trump's expression carefully. Despite her own reservations about him, she saw no deception, just conviction. Finally, she nodded. I'm in. Beck looked to Wallace, who exhaled, feeling the enormous weight of the decision. Count me in too, he said. A ripple of agreement circled the table as the other agents nodded. Trump remained silent for a moment, watching the unity forming before him. Then he placed both palms on the table. Good, because time is not on our side. With that, the group began to hash out a plan. They would hold discreet meetings, cross-check old archives with newly surfaced leads, and funnel intel through Beck's analytical brilliance. Morales would coordinate any field checks, and Wallace would run interference at the higher levels, offering benign explanations for their unusual activities. Trump, for his part, would feed them whatever scraps of information he possessed from that shadowy era in the late 80s. As the plan took shape, the tension in the room slowly shifted to a determined focus. The mixture of old secrets, new threats, and an uninvited ex-president had forged an unlikely alliance. Yet outside those glass walls, the entire building buzzed with speculation. Agents and staff who hadn't been briefed on the discussion only knew that something monumental was happening, something that could reshape their understanding of national security. And in the office of the director, phone lines blazed with calls from political aides, media representatives, and internal oversight committees. Rumors had already escaped the building. The rumor mill in Washington spun too fast for any one group to contain. Some whispered that Trump was forging an unholy alliance with the FBI, others that he was unearthing a political time bomb. Everyone agreed on one point: whatever it was, it could change everything. Finally, the glass door opened. Morales and Wallace emerged, followed by Beck and the other agents. Trump stepped out last. The hallway fell silent, with employees pausing mid-sentence or halting in place, phones still in hand. It felt as though the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for a single word or sign. But the group said nothing. One by one, they walked toward a restricted elevator that led to deeper levels of the FBI building. Trump remained with them, moving with renewed purpose, leaving behind a crowd of stunned onlookers. Inside that elevator, as the doors slid shut, the tension hit a fever pitch. No turning back now. They all understood that once they descended, they would be stepping into a labyrinth of old records and unspoken truths. It was an uncharted path that could lead them to the kind of explosive revelation that topples powerful figures, or to an impenetrable dead end that might end careers. When they reached the sub-basement, an area few ever saw, bare concrete walls and narrow corridors greeted them. The overhead lights gave off a harsh fluorescence that emphasized the industrial feel. Rows of metal shelves lined each side, loaded with boxes of classified files, some so old the labels had faded into near illegibility. Somewhere in this underworld, they hoped to find a thread linking the 1987 infiltration to modern-day events. Their footsteps echoed on the polished cement, each tap a reminder of how fragile their endeavor was. Nobody spoke. This wasn't a place for idle chatter. They spread out, scanning the old logs for anything referencing Red Falcon or the code that Trump had handed over. Beck fired up a massive archive terminal. Lines of white text scrolled over a black background. Morales and Wallace rummaged through boxes, pulling out battered folders. Every so often, someone paused at a document that seemed relevant, only to find entire paragraphs blacked out. Trump paced slowly, occasionally offering a detail that nudged Beck in a new direction. With each revelation, the scope of what they might be dealing with expanded. The sense of urgency mounted, yet they were enveloped by a secrecy that was both isolating and strangely exhilarating. They worked for hours in that confined space, the faint buzz of ancient fluorescent tubes humming overhead as though mocking their search for hidden truths. Old dust clung to their suits and jackets, the stale odor of forgotten decades lingering with each file they opened. Beck found a reference to a shell corporation suspected of laundering money through obscure real estate ventures in multiple American cities. Morales picked up another lead: unregistered foreign bank accounts tied to a handful of politicians who abruptly retired from public life in the late 80s. Wallace uncovered fragments of depositions, stories from unidentified insiders who vanished soon after speaking to the Bureau. Every piece of paper seemed to point to a vast puzzle, but no single line of text explained how it all fit together. Trump, uncharacteristically quiet, studied each discovery with a level of seriousness that surprised the agents. Now and then he would mutter, "That name sounds familiar," or, "I recall hearing whispers about that," prompting a flurry of activity from Beck, who logged every insight with swift keystrokes. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that this infiltration, if it had begun decades ago, might have branched into avenues no one had ever considered. Corporate acquisitions, political donations, philanthropic foundations, everything could be a potential front. It was a daunting realization. They weren't just unraveling a single crime, they were pulling on a thread that could unravel a tapestry of hidden influence. Time blurred, phones pinged with missed calls. The rest of the building went about its usual business overhead, But down here, the group felt sealed off from the outside world. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that the infiltration might still be active, shaping foreign policy through shell companies and hidden alliances. Beck had never felt adrenaline like this. She had processed 1,000 criminal profiles in her career, but never something that struck at the core of the nation's power structures. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, though she forced herself to focus. She wasn't just analyzing data now. She was participating in a covert search that could either protect democracy or expose them to unimaginable danger. One misstep, and they could lose everything: careers, credibility, even their personal safety. Morales, typically the ultimate stoic, found herself glancing at Trump more than once, trying to read him. She doubted his motives from the outset, yet his focus, his refusal to grandstand or speak in riddles, surprised her. He answered every question the best he could, admitting ignorance when he didn't know. There was a sincerity in his eyes that hinted this wasn't just about inflating his own legacy. Whether he sought redemption, vindication, or simply the truth, she couldn't say. But something about his resolve mirrored her own dedication to the Bureau's mission. She felt a strange kinship in that single-minded pursuit of answers. Wallace could practically feel the weight of the building above them. He'd dedicated decades of his life to upholding FBI standards, the core tenets that kept their institution balanced between secret intelligence work and accountability. Yet here he was, part of a small, unsanctioned group with a former president, searching for evidence of a threat that could upend the Bureau itself. He wondered if the director already suspected something was amiss. The possibility of discovering a clandestine foreign network with roots going back to his earliest days on the job unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. He remembered the old guard who trained him, men and women who believed in a code of silence around certain matters for the greater good. Could that culture of secrecy have enabled infiltration? The thought made his stomach churn. Eventually, Beck let out a hushed exclamation. She pointed at her screen, prompting everyone to gather behind her. Flickering text revealed an archival snippet, a reference to repeated financial transactions linking a known foreign operative to American business tycoons in 1987. The amounts were huge, moved in small increments through a complex web of accounts. One name on the transaction logs matched a name in a more recent brief about suspicious political donations. The same name had appeared in a super PAC's records just 2 months ago. The hair on the back of Wallace's neck stood up. If these ties were real, it meant the infiltration wasn't just a relic of the past. It was evolving, adapting, maybe even controlling significant policy decisions through bribery or blackmail. Morales's voice was low, vibrating with urgency. "We can't hold on to this alone. We need a plan, a secure chain of evidence. If we blow this open publicly, the infiltration network could vanish into thin air or worse, retaliate." Trump nodded gravely, but there was a spark in his eyes, like a man who finally found confirmation of something he'd long suspected. "We track the money, start small, verify step by step. Then, when we have enough to pin them, we strike fast." Everyone knew the next steps would be fraught with peril. Exposing a decades-old infiltration meant exposing people who'd spent years covering their tracks, forging alliances, and protecting themselves behind walls of power. Wallace closed the last file on the table. "We'll need absolute secrecy. Minimal paper trail, coded references in our system so no one outside this room can trace what we're investigating. If we slip up, they'll see us coming." Morales nodded. Beck set up an encrypted folder on the FBI's internal server, a hidden partition not on the usual directories. Each step felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. At any moment, a single slip could mean a catastrophic end. But the group pressed on, spurred by the realization that if they didn't act, this infiltration could continue manipulating the country from behind the scenes, unchecked and invisible. Trump stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed. Despite the tension, he looked oddly resolute. "We can't afford to wait. The longer we stay down here, the more likely someone notices what we're doing." Wallace gave him a measured nod. He felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, respect for the gravity Trump brought to the situation, wariness about stepping so far outside the conventional lines of protocol, but also a strange sense of hope. They might be the only line of defense against a hidden threat that had taken root decades ago. "All right," Wallace said, his voice echoing in the quiet basement. "Let's do this carefully, step by step. We confirm these leads, gather irrefutable evidence, and then we cut the head off this thing before it can ever strike back." One by one, they packed up their findings. Morales grabbed the crucial files, locking them in a secure briefcase. Beck downloaded the digital evidence onto an encrypted drive. Trump watched them methodically gather every shred of proof that had surfaced. The tension was still thick, but beneath it lay a collective resolve. They would not let the infiltration remain hidden. They would not stand by while powerful forces manipulated the country from the shadows.